Hello, everybody. I am Joe from Create Context. This is the weekly movie minute. Every week, we talk about a new movie, kind of the biggest release. We are brought to you by CreateContext.com. The same as every week. If you want to see more film reviews and analysis, check that out. If you like us, give us a subscribe. That's super cool. But what is even cooler, this week, we are talking about Osgood Perkins' newest movie, The Monkey. This film only comes out a few months after his huge 2024 horror hit, Longlegs. It's surprising to see this movie less than a year after his previous hit, but what's more surprising is how starkly different this one feels from the Nicolas Cage movie. Oz Perkins has been writing and directing movies for about 15 years now, but he really became a household name after the Longlegs phenomenon last year. In that film, Perkins made a movie that mirrored some of horror cinema's greatest hits. Longlegs drew inspiration from movies like Silence of the Lambs, Rosemary's Baby, and even a little bit of The Exorcist. With The Monkey, Perkins again draws inspiration from horror greats, but his new film feels much closer to an episode of Tales from the Crypt than an Oscar-winning thriller. The result is a film that is tighter than his breakout hit, and one that is much more fun. Theo James stars in The Monkey as Hal Shelburne, a boy who has been tortured his entire adolescence by a wind-up toy monkey. Once the key is turned on this monkey, someone dies. There's no rhyme or reason to the victim, and each kill is done in a gruesome Final Destination-style accident. From the minute the film begins with a cameo by Adam Scott and this Rube Goldberg-type harpooning death, the film immediately shows its hand and lets the audience know exactly what type of movie we are in for. This tonal shift away from Longlegs works really well in The Monkey's favor. Those who are expecting a dark and broody horror tale akin to Perkins' earlier work may be disappointed. This film is less concerned with creating a mystery and more worried about how much fun a movie can be. Hal is the lead of the film, but he shares the spotlight with his twin brother Bill. Theo James and Christian Convery both pull double duty, playing each role, and does a fantastic job portraying the characteristics of each. When they're younger, Hal is shy and easily embarrassed, while Bill is just a little punk. The exact archetype of every early 90s middle school bully. They each have horrific experiences with the monkey in their youth, experiences that shape who they become as adults when they're played by Theo James. After a really long opening first act showing the twins as young boys dealing with this monkey's curse, the film then transports us 30 years into the future. It's here where the monkey makes its return, desolating the small town the boys grew up in. The tagline of this film reads, "Everybody dies," and this movie delivers on that promise. While Perkins has been directing films since 2015, none of his earlier works really have a distinct style. They each tend to borrow or pay homage to different great filmmakers that have come before. His directorial debut, The Black Coat's Daughter, reads kind of like an M. Night Shyamalan film. It follows a strange young girl with a dark past. Succeeded a Netflix film, I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House. That movie aimed to exude gothic horror and feels like films like The Others or even a little bit of The Shining. Even his previous film, Longlegs, shares more DNA with Fincher films like Seven or Demi films like Silence of the Lambs, obviously, than Osgood Perkins' previous works. The Monkey is again another kind of reinvention that feels both unique and eerily familiar. And maybe that's Perkins' distinct filmmaking style, that he takes all of these inspirations and makes something wholly unique out of it while still feeling pretty familiar. The result of these wildly different aesthetics and vibes means that your mileage could vary with any one of Osgood Perkins' earlier films. That same can also be said for Stephen King adaptations, with a catalog of work that includes everything from heartfelt prison dramas to a story about grass-eating handymen. The Monkey is one of King's easier-to-follow narratives, and Perkins does an excellent job turning this short story into a feature-length film. Turning a short into a feature is always a little hit or miss, but this one here, The Monkey, hits more often than it misses, mainly due to the fact that the film just doesn't take itself too seriously. Right from the opening sequence, we understand this is going to be a silly, violent, over-the-top movie. I said earlier it's kind of like Tales from the Crypt. It also feels a little Tim Burton-esque, but just way more violent. That promise is made early on and continues to deliver throughout. The Monkey contains some of the gnarlier kill sequences I've seen in recent horror movies, but it never dips its toes into Saw or kind of other shock film categories. The kills are almost always played for laughs, and there's some truly great editing work in this film that's done to make these jokes land even harder. Instead of feeling dread or terror every time the monkey is wound, we get a bit of excitement, wondering who the next victim will be and what crazy household accident will lead to their demise. Despite how much fun this film is having, there is a deeper theme throughout the movie. The Monkey is ultimately a story about trauma and overcoming your worst moments. Early on in the movie, when Hal is young, he makes a decision that has dire unintended consequences. He then spends the rest of his life and the movie hiding from that mistake. He lets his past traumas consume him until finally he's forced to face them head on. It's a message that is pretty common to see in horror movies, and The Monkey doesn't do it better than any of the other ones. It's admirable that the film attempts to tackle some deeper issues, but the movie does work better as just a fun 90-minute horror comedy, like an episode of Tales from the Crypt or maybe even like a comedic Black Mirror. Still, I'd rather this movie attempt to say something than abandon all of King's Larger's ideas. It doesn't help the movie, but it doesn't actually hinder it either. The Monkey is a fantastic time at the movies, and this is the type of movie I'd like to see more from Osgood Perkins. If you like The Monkey or you're looking for something similar, I have a few recommendations. First, I'd check out Red Rocket by Sean Baker. This was Baker's most recent film before his Best Picture nominated Anora, which is one of my favorite movies of 2024. This movie follows Simon Rex as Mikey Saber Davies, a washed-up adult film star who returns to his Texas hometown after a 20-year career in the adult entertainment business. Red Rocket is a comedy, it's not a horror movie, but it does deal with a lot of the same themes as The Monkey. It has a man returning to a place of trauma and dealing with all of these loose ends he's left behind. It also, in following Saber, shows how destructive everything is around that person. And that's another big theme of The Monkey, how everywhere he goes, destruction follows. For Hal, it's because of this cursed monkey. For Saber, it's just because of his destructive tendencies. Red Rocket is also just a fantastic movie, and aside from Anora, I think it's probably Sean Baker's most approachable film. Next, I'd recommend Serial Mom. Serial Mom is a 1994 John Waters movie, and like Red Rocket, is one of Waters' most approachable movies. It stars Kathleen Turner as Beverly Steuffen, an idyllic suburban house mom who just also happens to be a serial killer. The film is filled with cheeky humor and an over-the-top score. It utilizes a lot of the same editing and music gags as The Monkey. Serial Mom definitely leans further into comedy and camp rather than the horror. There aren't really any horror elements aside from the basic plot structure, I suppose, but it's a super fun movie and one that I would recommend people check out. I'd also recommend the movie To Die For one specific reason. Something I feel The Monkey and this film have in common is their marketing. The marketing for each were both pretty different than the actual film we received. If you've seen any trailers or TV spots for The Monkey, it was marketed as a pretty strictly horror film, and it is in the traditional sense. A lot of commercials and trailers leaned heavily into Osgood Perkins' name with his long-leg success and the name of Stephen King, which makes sense after having such a huge movie like Longlegs, it doing so well in the theater, this being his follow-up and coming less than a year. It makes sense to lean into that. And you're obviously going to use Stephen King's name, but the last really big adaptation from Stephen King, those were the It movies, and those are pretty strictly horror as well. So when you're leaning into those two, you're kind of thinking that The Monkey is just going to be this strictly horror movie, but The Monkey is actually really a lot funnier than the trailers would lead you to believe. It's definitely a horror comedy and not a tense thriller. Gus Van Sant's 1995 film, To Die For, did a similar thing. The trailer and marketing for this movie made it seem like it was going to be a tense, femme fatale-like thriller, something akin to Basic Instinct. That was kind of all the rage at the time. And it also put a decent amount of emphasis on the true story aspects of the movie. This was based heavily on the Pamela Smart murder. But the actual movie is really this black satire comedy. The whole film is filled with bright pastel colors, and there's just a ton of humor in that movie. The film actually ends with the deceased's sister ice skating on the grave of the murderer played by Nicole Kidman. It's pretty funny, a lot of camp. Criterion, I think, did a much better job with their cover art than the original cover art to portray this, and I think it's just a really great movie that's worth a watch. Lastly, I would recommend the 1991 movie My Girl for reasons that will become evident during the third act of The Monkey. Thank you guys so much for hanging out and watching the Weekly Movie Minute. Again, if you could give us a subscribe, that would be super cool, and I'll see you guys next time.